Welcome back folks, my name's Shane. In today's video we're comparing two of my favorite crop sensor cameras. On one side of the screen you're looking at the Panasonic Lumix GH7 and on the other side of the screen you're looking at the Sony FX30. Now I've tried to get these framed the best that I can. There's going to be a difference obviously in what's going on behind me right here because of just the angle I've had to position both of these cameras on, but both of these cameras are great for shooting video, and if you can't get great results out of one or the other, you're doing something wrong. So you're looking at both cameras set up identically using aperture priority mode. Now I'm just going to move forwards like this so you can get a good sense of the autofocus performance on this one and then on the other one as well. Let us know if you can see a huge difference. Now you're going to be looking for the difference maybe in skin tones, background separation, all that kind of stuff, and you can make your mind up which one is which before I reveal which one you're looking at. Now on the Panasonic GH7 I'm currently using the 25mm f1.4, which is this one over here, and on the Sony FX30 I'm using the 35mm f1.8, which is this one over here, and I think both look great on the selfie screen. So yeah, let us know which one you like best and why in the comment section. This will be a video-centric test of both of these cameras, and at the end I'm going to talk about which one you should buy if you don't currently have either. Let's get into it. Now let's talk about autofocus performance when it comes to just talking to the camera like this. The great news is both of these cameras are great in most shooting scenarios. They'll track you if you're walking back and forth towards the camera, or if you go out of frame and walk back in, they'll both find you, no problems whatsoever. The Panasonic's actually faster at detecting a subject and changing to the subject over the Sony. So it's actually faster, it's a faster autofocus system. The Sony is still very good, and I like the way that it pulls focus from the background to the subject. The Panasonic just does it extremely fast, as you can see from this example. And this is the same if I hold my hand up, it's going to change very quickly like this. And so is the Sony in this sort of situation, but it is a little bit more sluggish. So just keep that in mind. If you want the fastest autofocus performance, Panasonic? I can't believe it. So yeah, they've done a great job with this autofocus system. Now there is a difference with some lenses. Now this is the thing that you have to keep in mind. So with older lenses for the Micro Four Thirds system, the autofocus performance will be very sluggish. So keep that in mind, whereas Sony have a lot of modern lenses with faster autofocus motors. So yeah, if you use a new lens though on the GH7, you can do anything like this without any problems, and you're going to get great results. And I trust this completely, whether I'm further back in the frame or if I'm just standing here talking to the camera. It doesn't seem to just lose me to the background anymore, which is awesome. Another common way people like to use autofocus is for holding things up like this and letting the camera switch to the foreground. So the Panasonic is nice and snappy here, and it's detecting a black shiny phone here, or the case on it as well. It seems to be doing a really great job. The Sony in this case also does it very well, and it also pulls focus nice and smooth. And again, this is with the speed and sensitivity on the Sony set to 4. So you get a good sense of the difference in just the way that it operates here. But both of these cameras will do a great job, but again, the Panasonic just seems to be that little bit quicker. Tap to focus has always been an advantage to the Sony platform. The Sony FX3, A7S III, FX30, and all the new cameras have always had great transitions between one point and the next by using the selfie screen on the back. Guess what? They're both now identical to each other. I ran the same test multiple times using the GH7, and it pulled focus beautifully from the foreground to the background. Touch to focus is a really handy thing to have anytime you're working behind the camera and you need a specific focus pull. So both of these cameras do it beautifully. Let's do a quick dynamic range test on both cameras. Now these are both rated at 13 plus stops, which is awesome. So Micro Four Thirds has definitely caught up to larger sensors in this type of scenario. So let us know if you can see a huge difference in the dynamic range, in the highlights, the information in the shadows, all that kind of stuff. Again, I've tried to frame this the best that I can, but just know I'm in the shade. There is some light coming from here, but the sun's actually behind this metal grill thing. So yeah, it's brighter outside than it is in here, and I'm tipping both of these cameras should be doing a pretty great job, and I'll comment on all of this when I get back to the studio. I found this test more interesting than anything else. Not only did the Panasonic Color Science look a lot better, the camera exposed the scene properly. One of the things that Sony does is it kind of finds the highlights and then underexposes everything else. You've kind of got to push the exposure to the right. If you don't know what that is, there's plenty of great videos on it on YouTube to get the exposure to do the job. But just leaving everything set to automatic, the Panasonic just looked better to my eye in terms of color science and just overall image quality in that particular test. It held onto the dynamic range perfectly as well. I'm going to give the win to the Panasonic. This is the ARRILOG 3 picture profile on the Panasonic GH7. So if you're looking to match either of these two cameras with an ARRI Alexa, the win definitely goes to the GH7. This is an ARRI approved picture profile. So it's basically like you're shooting in log. You can then get the same exact color science as the ARRI Alexa. Not the same dynamic range, that'd be a completely different thing, but just in terms of color science. So if you're at all working on a set or aspire to, maybe the win goes here to the GH7 as well, but it's just something that you get that you don't get on both cameras. So it's worth mentioning. The low light performance out of both of these cameras is essentially the same. So you get clean images up to about ISO 4000, which is pretty good. And then 6400 is usable in a pinch, but I wouldn't recommend going over that on either of these two cameras unless you want to add some noise reduction. The noise pattern on the Sony FX30 at higher ISOs is actually more prominent than that on the GH7. So they've done a great job of keeping the noise floor down on the GH7, but it's very impressive that these two are very comparable given the difference in the sensor size. Just 2 tips for shooting in low light: get the fastest lens you can and have the ISO under 6400 and you should be sweet, or get a full frame sensor camera if that's an option for you, because that will give you much better low light performance than either of these two cameras. Now let's take a look at the in-body image stabilization. So this is the GH7 with the 9mm f1.7 prime. I'm just using a Manfrotto Pixie tripod, and this is as bad as it will get. Now what I'm going to do is show you the best in-body image stabilization I can get out of the Sony FX30, and then we're going to go back to this GH7 and show you the E-stabilization mode. So take a good look at this. Let's switch it over. And now looking at the Sony FX30 with active steady shot on. So this is as good as the Sony system will get. This crops in quite a bit as well over having it off. But one of the big advantages that the Sony has here is that I can change the active steady shot to standard and get a wider field of view. But if I do that, look at the in-body image stabilization. It's going to make you sick. And if I turn it off altogether, it's going to be pretty bad, right? So that's like unusable. Standard helps a little bit, and active while it crops in is definitely the best. Now you can definitely make this work for vlogging, but yeah, I don't love it for handheld work. And if you want the best straight out of camera stabilization, the system isn't it. And now you're looking at the Panasonic GH7 with the E-stabilization on. This is all out of camera stabilization. How great is this? I don't have to use Catalyst Browse. I don't have to stabilize this in post. It's just going to look great. You can essentially run with this camera with the high E-stabilization on. It's just crazy. While it does crop in a little bit, you're getting excellent stabilization. So for handheld vlogging, the GH7 is awesome, or maybe even the G9 Mark II because it's lighter. Let's talk about frame rates, recording modes, and resolution. So the big win here goes to the Panasonic GH7, and it's not even close. The menu is full of just about every single option you could ask for. But some people won't need a lot of those modes. And while you can filter them out from the list so you can use only what you actually need, it might be overwhelming or unnecessary for someone who's just making YouTube videos to buy a camera and think that they need to be shooting RAW. RAW is unnecessary for people doing this type of video. It's going to chew through data. You'll need terabyte after terabyte of hard drive space. And while the workflow is great for those shooting in a professional environment for content creation, it's absolutely unnecessary. So you'll either be shooting in MOV or MP4. Now in comparable modes, I think the image quality out of both of these cameras are pretty much on par. There is a difference in the look, and you might like one or the other in terms of sharpness or just the way it sort of renders the scene, the color science, etc. That's all up to you. But just in terms of sheer resolutions, the Panasonic gives us OpenGate 5.8K, which I think is one of the best selling points of this camera. It allows you to crop vertically, horizontally. You can do anything with it for post-production or social media work as well. And if you've ever tried to vertically crop a 16:9 video, you know how limiting and annoying that is. Some people don't think it makes much difference, but it absolutely does. You get almost 4K in resolution vertically, which is the way to go for social networks that require a vertical format. So this is a really handy tool. The Sony FX30 doesn't give you any of that. So I would say the win here definitely goes to the GH7. And while you could get lost in the ProRes options and the ProRes RAW options on the GH7, I won't be using them for what I do. I think it's absolute overkill. So it really comes down to your shooting scenario. If you aspire to do serious filmmaking, the win goes to the GH7. Although it is micro four thirds, I think the dynamic range, color science, and now that it can match with an ARRI Alexa would definitely be the choice for me personally if I had to pick between both of these two as of right now. But the FX30 as a content creation machine is why I bought it. It's great. It doesn't overheat. We get active cooling. You can let either of these two cameras run all day. Now let's talk about crops, because this is something I didn't touch on just in the overview. So one of the benefits of micro four thirds, while the sensor is a 2x crop compared to full frame, there's no additional crops when changing mode. So I can shoot up to 4K at 120 frames per second or HD up to 300 with no additional crops on the image. Now shooting 4K up to 60 frames per second in any mode on the FX30, so 24, 25, 30, 50 or 60, there's no crop. But there is a crop when you're shooting 4K at 120 frames per second, but the image quality is still great. I've showcased that on the channel many times. I'm a big fan of the image quality in slow motion, and you also get autofocus on this camera when shooting in S&Q mode, whereas on the GH7, it's actually slowed down in camera, but you lose autofocus, which is a huge bummer. So the win there kind of goes to the FX30 just in terms of its usability, but the image quality and crops on both cameras are fine. So no problems there whatsoever. Let's wrap this video up. I'm going to talk about which camera to buy and why, but I'm going to also talk a little bit about price. So as of shooting this video, the Sony FX30 is $600 cheaper on B&H than the GH7. And if you're going to be predominantly shooting in a studio or on a tripod, this represents the best value as of right now. Sure, it doesn't have as many features as the GH7, but it will give you a closer to full frame look here in the studio over what the GH7 will do, and I'll show you an A/B example on screen. So you can see that the Sony FX30 gives me plenty of background blur, and I shot this using the 24mm f1.4 G Master. When we take a look at the Panasonic GH7 in the studio, while we still get the same great color science that you're looking at on my full frame camera here, we are getting less subject separation and background blur. So if that's important to you, the Sony FX30 makes getting a shallow depth of field that little bit easier. If you're someone who wants to shoot handheld run and gun style documentaries or YouTube stuff, whatever the case may be, this is where the GH7 gets the easy win. The IBIS is so good. It's gotten to the point now where I wouldn't even need a gimbal with this. If you love using a gimbal, you can get great results out of the FX30, but this camera is in a whole other league. It means you have to pack less. You can also find much smaller lenses for Micro Four Thirds as well. So while the camera body is heavier and larger than the FX30, the lenses, generally speaking, are a lot smaller, and these will still give you great autofocus performance. But some of these primes are a little bit more expensive than you might think for Micro Four Thirds, but it will still give you a really premium look, but without the same sort of shallow depth of field you'll find on APS-C or full frame. But the image quality out of this is awesome. I think in all of the A/B comparisons, I actually preferred this. With all of that said though, I love the image quality out of the FX30, and if you can live within its limitations of the IBIS system, it's a really great camera. But if you aspire to shoot RAW or you want ProRes or some of the open gate options, the Panasonic GH7 here gets the easy win. Anyway, let us know what you think. Thanks again for watching. I love this camera. I have to give it back, unfortunately. It goes back at the end of this month, but I've had a blast with it. You may see one of these pop up on the channel in the near future. I'm gonna have to pull the trigger on one at some point, but the FX30 is a great choice, again, if you're gonna be seated at a desk like this. I think it's a really great camera. Thanks again, catch you soon. See ya.